In the early 1990s, Sega's Megadrive was seen as being the more mature system for gamers to own, and as such, Namco released Splatterhouse 2 across the world in all the various territories it was available, and then its sequel, Splatterhouse 3, a year later. Now, just for noting here, Splatterhouse 3 was only available in the US and Japan and was never released in Europe unlike its prequel. Now, the Splatterhouse games were notorious for their violence and gore. They were positively dripping in it. And this is probably what attracted so many gamers to them at the time. It was so much more mature than anything you could get on the Super Nintendo or the NES with all its Mario and Kirby games. So, as you can see from the graphics here, things look pretty intense. And now we're about to get into some video footage of Splatterhouse 2. Now, Splatterhouse 2, or Splatterhouse Part 2 to give it its full Japanese title, is a side-scrolling beat-em-up game released in 1992 on the Mega Drive and the Genesis. It was published by Namco and developed by Now Production, who also handled the development chores on the game's sequel and Rolling Thunder 3 for the Mega Drive. Obviously, as the title indicates, it is a direct sequel to the late 80s arcade game Splatterhouse, which also was a side-scrolling beat-em-up. Now, as you can see, I've got a bit of the intro sequence running here, which sort of fills you in on what's going on in this game. There are the remains of the original house, and the game eventually brings you around to a new house. Is it the same house? Is it a different house? Well, actually, it's a different house. The US and European translation of the game's intro doesn't make this clear, yet the Japanese one does. Now, as you can see, the game is pretty dark and grim looking, but obviously there's some nice big chunky sprites there with reasonable animation. It's a little bit choppy, a little bit slow, but the game looks good in my opinion. There's a nice bit of parallax going on in the background there. The enemies look suitably disgusting, and I really love the music. I can't be more open about that. This is easily one of my favourite Sega Megadrive soundtracks. The music fits the game perfectly. As you can see, the enemies are kept pretty simple here. You've got some shambling zombie type things and some weird chompy worms, which are relatively easy to deal with. They're easy to jump over pits here. As I said, the game looks good. There's plenty of gore in there, but not a lot of blood. It's mostly slime and green goo and such. It's not quite as gory perhaps as its reputation would allow. A bit of blood there on yourself when you're trying to shake off an enemy. And as you can see, your life bar at the bottom of the screen is composed of hearts. Now here we are, we're at the first level boss. It's quite an easy introduction level really. It's quite straightforward, quite brief. A little bit of scene setting here. Oh no, they're more scared of you than what's in the room, are they? Are they not? What's through the hole? Oh, they see you. You're more scary than this huge, gigantic beast. Now this is a pretty simple boss fight. It's to be fair, I feel that the whole game lulls you into a bit of a false sense of security with this first level, because after this the game becomes ridiculously difficult, and I mean ridiculously. But despite this difficulty, the game was a massive success, obviously, as it spawned a sequel, which we're going to look at in just a moment. Here you go, get these lovely little illustrated scenes between the levels, setting the scene for the next one. And now on to Splatterhouse 3. Now, Splatterhouse 3 was released approximately a year later in 1993 and of course was known as Splatterhouse Part 3 in Japan. The intro relies on what appears to be some pre-rendered sprites, and as you'll see in a moment, there's a lot of digitized imagery in this game. It's quite primitive, it's quite basic, but there you go, you've got some digitized photos animated into screaming faces. And this wonderfully done title screen, which as you can see I'm playing the Japanese version here. Now again, this was developed by Now Production and was one of the first games after the controversy surrounding Night Trap and this game's prequel to be rated by Sega of America's own Video Games Rating Council for its graphic violence and gore. As you can see, there's a few tweaks here. The graphics have been changed. You get these little cutscenes every so often, sometimes between each room, sometimes at timed intervals, again using digitized photographs. It gives it a more realistic, harder edge. As you can see, instead of being on a single 2D plane for the scrolling, now you can move in and out of the screen. The graphics have been redrawn. I personally don't think that they look as good. Whilst the animation is better, I don't actually think the sprites look as good as they did in Splatterhouse 2. Certainly Rick is quite different and just doesn't look as aggressive here. The mask is more obviously skull shaped in this, and less Friday the 13th inspired than the prequels. This was presumably to continue to avoid any legal issues which may or may not have occurred. I would also say this game it's not more difficult than Splatterhouse 2. It's difficult, but in a way that has a better curve, if you like, a better difficulty curve. You know, as you can see, I've been collecting these little balls when you have this amazing special move where you can hulk up effectively, which does make you more powerful. Back down to normal Rick. As I said, the structure in this is a bit more loose. You have a map to work around and everything is timed. You've got the timer at the top, and unless you hit certain points of the game by certain times, things can change. There are 4 different endings because, you know, depending on whether you save your wife Jennifer and your child or not, the combinations give you different options. The music in this game again is quite good, but it's not Splatterhouse 2 quality. As you can see, I'm not exactly brilliant at this game, but you know, I'm doing my best. These enemies are incredibly frustrating with their reach. And there you go, Splatterhouse 2 and Splatterhouse 3 for the Sega Megadrive and Genesis. Excellent, fun titles which are well worth it if you love horror films and horror games. As I said, they can be quite pricey. I think currently a boxed UK copy with manual is going for about £30 if you can find them in a retro shop, sometimes more on eBay. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I personally think this is much better than my previous Splatterhouse video. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can find me at 8_16_32-bit. You can also find me using the same username on Instagram, and if you search 8:16:32-bit retro games blog, you will find me on Facebook. So this is Learned Rob. Until next time, signing off and saying enjoy your games and happy Halloween.